The honourable member for Vancouver Quadra regarding national defence.
Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that this is a time of great instability in the world. ISIL's murderous reign of terror is in an already chaotic Middle East is only one of the many current global crises. Tumultuous periods such as this are why an essential responsibility of the Canadian government is to ensure this country has the military capacity to defend its borders as well as respond to major international crises. This was well expressed in a 2003 report by the Canadian Defence and Foreign Affairs Institute, which stated that the Canadian forces, and this is a quote, are a vital instrument of national defence and sovereignty and a key implement for achievement of Canada's national goals at home and abroad. A strong and modern military designed specifically to meet Canada's security and foreign policy needs will serve Canada's pride and Canada's interests. It is therefore incumbent on Canadian governments to ensure that Canada's military forces are well funded, equipped to the highest standards, and recruited and trained to fight alongside the best against the best. Well, the Conservative government has failed in its duty to do this and failed in its duty to properly equip Canada's military. Regarding Iraq, as I mentioned in my question we're debating tonight, Liberals proposed a range of non-combat military and humanitarian contributions Canada could make. We opposed the government's plan to enter a combat airstrike mission in Iraq as the mission and its goals were unclear. The Prime Minister had failed to make the case for taking CF-18s to Iraq and taking Canada into war. While I have every confidence that our competent and experienced Canadian Armed Force members will ensure the safety and effectiveness of the equipment used in this mission, the reality is that Canada's CF-18s are coming to the end of their life expectancy. Currently, we have 77 operational CF-18s, all of which date from the 1980s, and there have been 2 rounds of upgrade programs between 2021 and 2010, and yet another extension is now being planned as the government has neglected to secure a replacement for this fleet. But the urgent need to replace Canada's CF-18s was signaled even before Canada's military operation in Libya. In 2008, 6 years ago, Major Ed Roberts published an article in the Canadian Military Journal entitled "Stretching the Thin Blue Line, Overtasking the CF-18 Hornet." In the article he noted, quote, "The upgrading of our CF-18s will allow them to operate with other air forces in joint operations. Unfortunately, this upgrade does not fully address the airframe fatigue that is occurring on an aircraft initially intended for retirement in 2002. As the airframe gets older, more repairs are required, and our operational tempo requires a substantial increase in spare parts that must be transported to war theater when the aircraft are deployed. While we are spending a lot more money on a single layer of air defense, we may not have enough fighter resources to achieve the overall defense objectives that the current policy has established." Mr. Speaker, Auditor General Ferguson's 2012 report exposed the Prime Minister for having hidden the real cost estimates for the F-35 fighter jets to replace the CF-18s. This is now on hold. We have no idea what the government plans, and Canada's aerospace industry is paying the price. Moreover, the government cut another $3.1 billion from military procurement in the last federal budget. Their cuts have resulted in a 20% reduction in funds available for spare parts and the maintenance of Canadian Forces equipment. Sadly, Canada's military capacity is vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, as proud of our troops as we are, this government's mismanagement of military investment and procurement is creating deep concerns.
The honourable member for Vancouver Quadra.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm dismayed to hear the member saying something that is patently not true. This budget has not gone up year over year since this government came in. In fact, by 2010, the freeze started, and by 2011, the cuts began, and this budget is slated to shrink by a total of $2.7 billion in 2015 compared with 2011. In fact, the calculations show that this budget is the equivalent of 2007's budget when inflation is taken into account, and as a percentage of GDP, as the World Bank has noted, this government is spending 1% of GDP, compared with the Liberals having spent 1.3% of GDP. 1% is the lowest since the World Bank began recording these in the 1980s. And so what this has led to is a lot of chaos because of these cuts and clawbacks under this government. It is making our military and our armed forces vulnerable to not being able to serve future requirements, and this government should at least be open and transparent.